Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. Shout out to all our homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from homers out there. I'm Naresh Vissa with Adam Schroeder. Today we have another great guest, Thomas W. Jones. He's the former vice chairman, president, and COO at TIAA-CREF, TIAA-CREF. I actually, Thomas, don't know personally, but I heard Roger Ferguson speak in person many years ago when he was running TIAA. TIAA is the largest pension system in the world. He's the former vice chairman of Travelers, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and Freddie Mac. He's a former chairman and CEO of Smith Barney Asset Management, the former CEO of Global Investment Management at Citigroup, the former treasurer at John Hancock Insurance Company, the founder and senior partner of venture capital firm TWJ Capital, which I assume he is focusing on full time right now. He's the author of the book From Willard Straight to Wall Street, a memoir. So without further ado, Thomas W. Jones, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, well, let's first start with your background, because you have a storied background on Wall Street. And like I mentioned earlier, heard Roger Ferguson speak. Were you the president before or after he ran TIAA?
I was president before Roger Ferguson. I was at TIAA until 1997, and Roger came about 5 years after me.
Got it. Well, let's just quickly walk through, or it doesn't have to be quick. This doesn't seem like a quick journey. You wrote an entire book about it, so let's go through how you went from apparently a civil rights activist, I guess we can call it, a civil rights student activist in the 1960s and 1970s when you were in college. I believe you even got in trouble while doing that, to becoming one of Wall Street's most powerful minorities.
Well, I wrote my book in part because I think I represent what I would call the transitional generation of African Americans, meaning in my youth, I was part of the civil rights movement, which was still fighting over fundamental issues like voting rights and the right to be free of petty discrimination, such as segregated restaurants and segregated hotels, segregated public accommodations, segregated schools, and so on. That's the America up till the 1960s. I was the transitional generation, kind of saying, we're not going to tolerate this any longer. We're really going to fight over this. This America has to change, or we're going to fight about it. And at the conclusion of the 60s, and it wasn't a foregone conclusion, because just remember, Martin Luther King was assassinated, John Kennedy was assassinated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated. There was the anti-war protest. There were the days of rage in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. There was a lot of turmoil with regards to which direction this country was going to turn. And in the late 60s, it still wasn't clear which way the country would turn. Richard Nixon was elected following Lyndon Johnson, who had authored the War on Poverty. It was very possible that Richard Nixon was going to take the country on a hard right turn, which would mean potential suppression and oppression of the civil rights thrust, or it was equally possible that the country would, turn more towards the left, try to pursue the war on poverty that Lyndon Johnson had started. As it seemed to me that the country was going to try to aspire to live up to the creed that's articulated in the founding principles, i.e., try to be more liberal and inclusive, I decided, I wanted to be part of that. And I knew that the toughest fight would be in the business world because that's where the wealth is. And I decided that even though I felt I had virtually no chance of success because, in part because not only was there the usual racial discrimination, but I was labeled as the black radical from Cornell. So I thought I had next to no chance, but I still thought it was the most important fight. And so I decided to pursue a career in business. And, kind of one step at a time. I positioned myself psychologically. I thought I basically had next to no chance of success. So to prepare myself psychologically, I said, you can't go into this situation depending upon these organizations to promote you or praise you. You're just likely to be fired any day. And so, you have to be prepared psychologically. You can't depend upon the organization for self-esteem or reinforcement or a sense of progress or achievement. You're probably going to lose. So how do you prepare yourself? And what I did was tell myself, well, the only things you can control are the work effort you put in every day and the way you present yourself to other people, your colleagues, and the way you interact with people. That's all that you have under your control. Your work effort, your interactions with other people, and the way you present yourself. That's all you can control. And so the way you have to approach this is every day you have to feel like you gave 100% of your best effort to excel in each of those three dimensions. And that's all that you can do. And you walk away every day satisfied if you've done that. And, if you end up being fired, okay, well, you gave it the best you could. That's all that you could control. And I discovered something there, which is, and I'm shortening this quite a bit. I discovered that when you really focus 100% on trying to excel at what you do every day, the first discovery is that most people, including me, had never approached a 100% level of effort because, we're all socialized that 90 or 95% is an A. That's what we learn in school. And, most of the time, 90 or 95, it doesn't matter whether you got 100, on a given exam or a given work assignment or whatever. But there's, in fact, quite a big difference between functioning at a 90 or 95% level and functioning at a 100% effort level. There's quite a bit of difference. And it doesn't show up day one. It doesn't show up day two. Doesn't matter whether you got 95 or 100 on this given exam. But if you keep putting out that 100% effort, your maximum capability, and if you're talented, if you have pretty decent, innate talent, it creates a gap between you and the people around you who are functioning at 90 and 95 in most top American corporations. And over time, the level of performance and achievement is noticeable and significant. I'd add one other point. I discovered that the people that are most successful in major American corporations are kind of like sports coaches. One of the reasons they're at the top is because they've learned how to build the best teams. They build the most successful organizations. In big corporations, the top managers don't do the work. They cannot do the work themselves. What they do is build teams that get the work done. And the people that rise to the top are the people that build the most successful teams. And so these people are always on the outlook for talent. They're like scouts. They're looking for people to add to their teams. And I began to, without even being aware of it, I began to come to the attention of, more senior managers, and people would just show up at, various projects that I was working on, or client presentations, or other things, where a third person could kind of observe and participate without being overly intrusive. And I began to get picked up by these top guys. They brought me onto their team. They brought me onto their team because they saw my work effort and they saw the quality of my work. And, what I received from them was then the psychological reinforcement of belonging. I also received protection, because there are always people that are, not everybody's going to love you, no matter where you are or what you're doing. And I received the promotions and compensation increases and so on. So over the years, just, I kept that effort up, and it led to, a level of success which I could not have imagined when I started on that journey.
Talking about building teams, I think that's even more applicable to entrepreneurship, even more than making it in the corporate world. So here at the Work From Home show, I would say we're more of an entrepreneurial show, and how to make money and invest from home. We do have a pretty wide listenership of people who do work from home while at companies, while at corporations, but their goal is to leave their W-2 job, to leave the corporate world, so they can live a life of more freedom and create their own value and create their own wealth. So when it comes to team building, I think not just team building, but building a winning team, I think that's even more applicable to entrepreneurship, because if you want to be a good entrepreneur who can create a system that will generate cash flow, or to create a long-lasting, sustainable business, you're going to have to create a team of some kind, even if it's just a small team of 3 people, 4 people, or a loose team of independent contractors. You're going to have to be that leader of the team and lead it forward. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And most critical, I would say, is to be effective at building teams. You need to orient your thinking to recognizing what are the talents and capabilities that other people have, and how can you elevate their achievements, elevate them to their highest level of achievement relative to their potential, so that people feel fulfilled working with you. That's the key to building strong teams. It's not being about yourself. It's being about understanding what are the capabilities of the people around you, and bringing out the best in those people, so that they're not only performing at a high level, but they are really fulfilled and enjoy working with you, and they want to be on your team. I mean, that's the key ingredient. Not that you're the personal superstar, but that you bring out the best in other people. I would make one other comment. A pivotal point in my life early on, in part because I did not think I had high odds for success in the corporate world. I when on my honeymoon as a 25-year-old, I told my new bride that one of the things I would like to do, I said, the way I phrased it was just as, I mean, we were the typical young couple. We had both had good college educations. We both had good jobs. We had no money, okay? And our parents were not capable. I mean, they had done their best to help us get through college and so on, but we were not going to inherit anything. And we had the typical loads of student debt and personal debt and so on. And I said, in a capitalist economy, you really need to try to have some capital to work with. I mean, it's not just about labor income. And I said, one of the things I'd like to try to do, since we both have good jobs, would be to see if we could just live on one income, just live on one of our incomes, and let's try to save the other income. And within a few years, we'd probably have enough money to begin doing some investing. And my wife, I love her dearly. We've been together almost 50 years now. She was game for it. Sounds easy to do, but in fact, it meant that we weren't living the same lifestyle as our peers. We were making as much money as they were, but it meant we couldn't go to the same restaurants. We couldn't buy the same clothes. We couldn't take the same vacations and so on. But guess what? Within 3 years, we had saved enough money that we were living in Boston at the time, and I saw an ad in the Sunday Globe advertising redevelopment properties in the south end of Boston. There were, burned out, abandoned brownstones and so on, because in the mid-'70s, the south end of Boston was in the early stages of urban renewal. I saw a couple of properties that were just a few blocks from Copley Square in downtown Boston. We were the only people in the whole city of Boston to put a bid in on those properties. We bought those burned out brownstones for $6,000. And 3 years later, we had a 10-unit apartment building. We were living on the top floor with a roof deck overlooking Copley Square, okay? The building was cash flow positive, and we were off to the races. That was, and during my career, I was always, even though I was doing well in the corporate world, this was always in the back of my mind. This is my fallback, It's the entrepreneurial opportunity. And of course, real estate is especially attractive because of the leverage available. But my point there is, again, that's teamwork. It doesn't have to be your partner or your spouse or your you have to have a team to accomplish things. And so, my teammate was my significant other, my spouse, but our success came because of our teamwork, our mutual sacrifice to live on one income so we could get some money to invest. So that's just an anecdote that I think might be helpful to some of your listeners who are thinking about, how do I go from having nothing to having something? And part of the answer is you got to do a little self-sacrifice along the way, temporary sacrifice, in terms of, it's one of the ways, lowering your consumption so that you can save and invest. And it works, it works. It's not the most fun while you're doing it, but in a way, even my wife came up with so many bean recipes. I mean, this is literally true. So many different ways to cook beans, different kinds of casseroles and so on, but just meals that you could have that were nutritious, but really inexpensive. And, one of our celebration would be if we could buy a bottle of wine that cost $5, So people need to think about little things like that, how much you can really do to help yourself that may not be, obvious or, self-apparent at first blush, but there's really quite a bit that many of us can do to advance our economic position.
You talked about needing that extra 5 to 10% to really distinguish yourself and stand out. How did you know you were giving that extra 5 to 10%? How can people really kind of evaluate themselves to see that they are giving what they need to really stand out from, the others who are doing the 90 to 95% and looking good day to day in general?
Ask yourself, you're the only one who knows how much you have inside of yourself. Nobody else knows the answer to that. You're the only one who knows every day, have I done everything I could do to excel? Have I done my best? Or, you're the only one who knows that. You're the only one who knows if you're shirking and just trying to get by with 80 or 85 or 90%. So you ask yourself, because deep in your heart, this is your pledge to yourself. You're holding yourself accountable. That's the key here. You're not looking for your boss to hold you accountable. You're not looking for the approval of other people. Of course, you want those things, but your real scorecard is in your own mind. Am I fulfilling my promise to myself to do my absolute best every day? And, part of the beauty of that, this kind of accountability to yourself, part of the beauty of that is that it gives you what I call self-actualization, meaning that you've achieved your highest potential, which is all that any person can do. No one of us really knows exactly how good our talents are, exactly how good our capabilities are. All we know is when we are absolutely doing our best with whatever skills and capabilities, we've been blessed. And so you're answering to yourself in your own heart and your own mind. And when you take yourself to the maximum level that you're capable of, you're at peace with yourself because this is all that I can do. And now the chips fall where they may, but I'm satisfied. I've done all that I can do. That's all that a living person can do. And so that's how you know. You know it in your heart, you know it in your mind. And you ask yourself to give that to yourself, and you go to sleep in peace every night because, that was a day when you fulfilled your promise to yourself. And it's a good feeling to have. And it does not necessarily mean that everything is going to work out perfectly, but you're still a winner because you've given yourself that victory of maximum effort. And if you learn to do that, you will. My perspective is you will succeed. It may not be the first try. It may not. Sometimes you got to find, what field should I be working in? What kind of career should I be pursuing? What kind of opportunities should I be pursuing? So, the first thing you try may or may not work out. You may not even be working in an area which lends itself to your particular talents. But if you develop that discipline of bringing out the best in yourself and you keep applying it and you keep searching for opportunities to do that, it will work out. That's as sure a bet as you will find in life, 99.9% certain that you're going to be, self-fulfilled with the outcomes that you'll achieve.
Thomas, we spoke a little bit off air about your success in real estate. We've done several episodes on passive real estate investing, the tax benefits, the management. And I'm just curious to know, it's a two-part question because they're somewhat tied together as far as side hustles in investing go. Number one is, did you continue your side hustle real estate career, buy up more buildings, run down buildings, whatever, just to do on the side? Because Adam and I were real estate investors, and I spend about 30 minutes a month managing my properties and doing that. And I make 4 figures a month net profit doing that. 30 minutes a month, 4 figures. And my second question is, you were the former vice chairman at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So you understand money and banking, given your storied career in banking. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on cryptocurrency and whether you truly believe cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, but the other cryptocurrencies out there, are stores of value, and why so many large institutions are now jumping into the cryptocurrency space.
Well, on the first question, we did continue real estate investing for another period of maybe 8 years. After that first project, we had a 10-unit apartment building. We gave ourselves one treat, which is we took a summer trip, a 3-week grand tour of Europe. Neither of us had ever been to Europe. So we took an American Express grand vacation tour around Europe. And then we went back to our routine, living on one salary, though obviously we had more income now with the building that we owned. And 3 years later, we did a second 8-unit building. So now we had 18 apartment units in the south end of Boston. And again, all within a few blocks of Copley Square. My career began to move in the corporate world. And when I became senior vice president at John Hancock Insurance Company in Boston, it became a little bit impractical. I needed to make choices to do either one or the other, meaning either really pursue real estate or really pursue the corporate world. And frankly, I was achieving more in the corporate world than I had thought was likely. And then my decision was kind of made for me when a new tax law was passed in 1986, which greatly reduced some of the real estate benefits in terms of the degree to which you could pass through the property depreciation onto your personal tax return, and other changes that made it less attractive from a tax efficiency perspective. And so we sold our properties, very profitably, and I just focused on then driving forward in the corporate world. But I was pleased that I had the choice. If I had not received the opportunities that came my way in the corporate world, I would have gone full time into being a real estate developer and property owner. With regards to cryptocurrency, to be totally frank, to me the purposes of currency are medium of exchange and store of value. And I do not understand how something like, Bitcoin, which is fluctuating up and down, by frankly kind of huge percentages in its value. I don't understand how you use something like that as a store of value or a medium of exchange. That it just, you need stability in the unit of valuation. You need stability in the medium of exchange. When you're exchanging a property for some currency, you need to have some confidence in what the currency is going to be worth. And, don't just look at the upsides of how much Bitcoin goes up some days. Look at the downsides and ask yourself, gee, if you had exchanged a property for this Bitcoin currency that's now worth 30% less a day later, how would you feel about that? So I don't understand that function. And then finally, I would say I take great confidence from the fact that the United States government stands behind the currency that I'm accepting in this unit of value and medium of exchange, that the United States government says this is legal tender, for all transactions, debts, and other purposes, other monetary purposes in the United States. And then that also applies, pretty much worldwide because of the power of the U.S. economy. I don't know who stands behind something like Bitcoin.
We don't even know who created it.
Yeah, it came out of nowhere. And as far as I'm concerned, it may disappear into nowhere one day. So I don't have the confidence, to use that cryptocurrency for the purposes that I have in mind for money. It does not serve a useful purpose as money. Now, with regards to why so many big banks seem to be gravitating towards it, if I were running a major bank, my attitude would be, I'm willing to do what is necessary to service our customers. So if we have customers that wish to use, this cryptocurrency as a medium of exchange or investment in their accounts, I'm willing to facilitate that on a fee basis. That is, I will service their needs in ways that are structured so that I take no risk whatsoever on the value of the currency, right? That's not the business I want to be in. I want to be in the business of servicing my clients and helping them meet their ends, their objectives. But I do not want to be in a business that exposes me to, in effect, speculation on what the value of this cryptocurrency may be. So that would be my, my guess as to why major financial institutions are saying that they will, service accounts, allow customers to have accounts in cryptocurrency. I'd be very surprised if there's any major financial institution that's actually exposing itself to the risk of the fluctuation in value of the cryptocurrency.
Well, I know that Morgan Stanley, Goldman, they hired crypto desks, or they just started crypto trading desks. So it hasn't spread around Wall Street, right? It's not like trading the securities that were being traded, or I think you were helping run Citibank, the securities that you guys were trading in 2006, 2007. Which led to almost the demise of Citibank. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that in the next question. But I do know that Wall Street, many of the banks are catching on to crypto, and they are starting the trading desks, basically hiring or FX traders, people from their internal FX desks, and having them figure out this whole cryptocurrency thing.
Well, let me give you an example, though. There's a world of difference between a bank like Goldman or Citi setting up a trading desk, which simply becomes, let's call it, a repository for client requests, bid and ask. So, bid to buy the currency or ask to sell the currency. And all of this activity is coming in to the Goldman or the Citi trading desk. Bids and ask, people that want to buy, people that want to sell. And essentially the bank is just matching, they're matching bids against, buys against sells, and they're taking out a tiny percentage as a transaction fee. There's a world of difference between, setting up a trading desk like that, which is servicing client buys and sells, versus what happened to the banks in the mortgage business in 2008, when they began to hold, instead of just crossing transactions, they began to think they were smart enough to know when to hold some of the mortgages on their own books, okay, thinking that prices would go higher.
Yep.
And the day that the mortgage market collapsed, there were organizations like Citi that had huge exposures relative to the size of their capital. when the market collapsed. They had actually, so this is what's called proprietary trading.
Right. So the
Okay.
difference, what you're saying is, I think it was Dodd-Frank that essentially got rid of proprietary trading. So in the case of cryptocurrency, the banks are not using their own money to trade Bitcoin on a daily basis or other speculative cryptocurrencies. Instead, the banks are servicing their clients solely.
Exactly.
So they're not trying to, and proprietary trading, I believe, is just not a thing anymore.
Proprietary trading is when they hold the book for their own account. Now, I'm not saying that people, there may be somebody out there that's doing that, but it's a losing proposition. Almost guarantee you that over time. And that's why the people that succeed over time, the Goldman Sachses of the world, rarely let themselves get exposed to those kind of proprietary trading positions. And it's why often organizations like that will insist that even if they had an exposure on a given day, it's got to be closed. The books have to be closed every day, meaning that you'll only take that proprietary exposure for a fraction of a day, a few minutes, a few hours, but never overnight. And so, that's the next level up from just servicing the client, crossing the buys and sells. You might take a temporary little exposure, when there's a little gap during the day, a little mismatch of the buys and sells. You might take a little bit of exposure by filling in to match up the buys and sells, but you got to balance it out by the end of the day.
So you're in a unique position. I want to get your take on this. You've run, big funds, obviously with TIAA-CREF and your other jobs, and you've done real estate stuff. So right now we are seeing an unprecedented amount of money from hedge funds and big investment funds coming in and buying up, mostly single-family rental properties that unlike they've ever done before. My question is, whenever we see another recession happen, when we see another downturn in the housing market, how is it going to play out differently or similarly to what happened during the Great Recession? Since, when the funds can't make their expected returns, what's going to happen?
The first question you always have to ask yourself is, how much leverage are the funds putting into those positions? Okay, so if one of the reasons it doesn't work out for the average consumer in a severe recession is because the average consumer has typically 20% equity, 80% debt. So that debt position, that has to be serviced with the monthly mortgage payment quickly becomes difficult for the average consumer to carry if their income is disrupted, which is what happens if they lose their job in a recession. So that's why the mortgage play, the real estate play breaks down, for the average consumer. So by analogy, to understand the hedge fund exposure, you really have to understand how much debt, how much leverage are they putting into those positions. That's number one. And number two, what kind of window they have on the other side with regards to when do they have to return funds to their investors. Okay, so that's kind of the framework to evaluate that risk. How much debt, do they have to service, if this market slows down and they stop collecting rents. And then the other side of it is, when does their cash have to be returned to the investors that, gave them the capital to work with. And so one of the things that protects the average hedge fund from, the kind of problems that the consumer or a bank can run into is that the hedge fund, at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that they made to their investors, right? When you invest with the hedge fund, it's not like with a bank where, you deposit money at a bank the bank legally has an obligation to give you your money back. That's why banks are, have certain government regulations and so on, because they're obligated to give you your money back. The hedge fund is not obligated to give you your money back. I mean, absent fraud or something like that, if they lose the money in a bad investment, well, that's, the K-1 that they issue to you just shows a loss, and you get to take that loss through your personal tax return. But you do not have any claim against the hedge fund. So there's quite a bit more protection with regards to, what are the downside risks in the hedge fund strategy. On the debt side of it, it's almost impossible to know how leveraged they are because, one of the things hedge funds do is they're very secretive about their positions and their strategies. And one of the reasons they're secretive is because, it's a predatory world, and they do not want other investors to be aware of their financial positioning, because other investors may try to take advantage of the weaknesses in their financial positioning. So at the end of the day, you're kind of left with only being able to make the generalization that that if interest rates start going up, it's going to increase stress on the debt positions of the hedge funds. The higher the interest rates go, the more stress it creates on those debt positions. And secondly, you can make the generalization that to the extent that there is a recession or some decline in employment or some decline in consumer income, that it's going to create stress on the ability of the people that are renting those houses to continue, their monthly payments. Those are the only two generalizations you can make. But the particular degree of stress against any given hedge fund when they reach the breaking point is almost impossible to know in the way that they conceal their positions.
I want to talk a little bit about not necessarily failure, but the downs, going through tough times. Reading your bio, there were two instances in your business career where it seemed things were not smooth sailing. The first was, there were two instances where you and the organizations you were running, or the groups you were running, were investigated by the SEC. And then there was, of course, the 2007, 2008, 2009 mortgage crisis, and you were running Citi Asset Management, and I believe you were probably one of the top 3 members at Citi, along with Mr. Vikram Pandit, who you had to work with to get Citi out of that situation. So can you talk about these downs that you went through in your business career, how you overcame them, and what you learned?
Well, just your timing's a little bit off. I left Citigroup in 2004, so I left several years before Citi stumbled into the mortgage crisis. But you're quite right. I was fired by Citigroup, CEO Chuck Prince. Actually, a day I was making a presentation to the board, October 19, 2004. And it was about 2:30 in the afternoon, and I was summoned that, I needed to go to the CEO's office. I went to his office, and he told me that I was being fired, and the press announcement would be at 5 o'clock that afternoon, and that he was telling me at that time so that I would have an opportunity to speak to my people before the press announcement. And I said to him, why do you feel the need to do this? Sandy made you the CEO. I said, Sandy Weil made you the CEO. All you had to do was tell me that you want your own team and give me 6 months and, I'd be out of your way. Why do you feel the need to do this? You're probably ending my career. And he said, I'm doing it this way because this is the way I want to do it. And so went back to my office, called my wife so that she wouldn't be surprised by the public announcement. My senior direct reports came into, conference room, and that took quite a bit more time than I had expected because it was pretty emotional. There were some pretty deep attachments and relationships. And, this was in the context, the SEC was investigating my business, which, if you know anything about the kind of the history of what happened to Citi, let's take it from 2000 to 2004, kind of that 5-year period. There were constant investigations of the Citigroup corporate and investment banking business. Things like the collapse of Enron and the bankruptcy of WorldCom and just major. This was an era, kind of a 5-year period, when there was like scandal after scandal after scandal in corporate America, and this kind of public and legislative wave of saying we're going to crack down. There's bad accounting, bad financial reporting, malfeasance, and so on. The Citigroup Corporate and Investment Bank got caught up in, if not every one of those various scandals, 80% of them, and constant fines and penalties and settlements with the regulators and so on. My business never got involved in any of it until one claim was raised in 2004. I won't go into detail about it. But the point is that in all that stuff that had happened with the corporate and investment bank, it always ended the same way, which is that the company would negotiate a settlement with the regulators. The settlement always included the senior executives of the business unit that were involved. It always had, the legal language around it. You've probably seen this in the press. Neither the corporation nor the executives admit nor deny any of the allegations. This is what you constantly see. That's the wording around these corporate settlements, even today. Neither admit nor deny. The company would pay a fine, and then, it would go back to business as usual, okay? In my case, the SEC starts an investigation. The company fires me, and then they settle the case with the SEC and leave me out of the settlement, which then meant the SEC came after me personally, okay? So to your question about how I dealt with this, that first week was tough because first trying to manage the effect on my family, the Citigroup public relations machinery just went into overdrive. Every day there were newspaper articles implying, here's this bad apple that the new CEO, Chuck Prince, had to get rid of, and he's cleaning up the shop and so on and so forth. And one of the things your family goes through in these types of situations, first they're scared, because when there's this constant barrage of bad publicity, people don't understand how Machiavellian, corporate politics and, corporate strategies can be. So, where there's a lot of smoke, maybe there's some fire. Maybe dad did something wrong and maybe dad's going to go to jail or something, and, maybe we're going to be busted financially. And then on a personal level, one of the things your children learn is that, human nature can pretty much generally be divided into, let's call it 3 streams, okay? So there's the stream of people, the third of people who they're going to be as sympathetic as they can be and, non-judgmental, but very sympathetic. Gee, wow, I'm sorry, telling your kids, I'm sorry to see what you're going through. If there's anything I can do to be helpful to you, I'm still your friend, da-da-da-da-da-da, okay? So that's 1/3, so to speak. Another third are kind of, people just kind of adopt a neutral stance. Gee, it seems to be a lot going on here, but I know you never know what you don't know. And so I'm not going to make any judgments about this until, the full story is told. And then there's a third that are, human nature. There's going to be those people who actually take pleasure in your pain, right? They take pleasure in seeing how, in biblical terms, the mighty are laid low, those on high are brought down. So there's a third of people who are going to, kind of delight at seeing your kids maybe not be so at the top of the heap as they used to be, and so on and so forth. So your first job, is to try to work your family through that management of the fear and the pain, and to comfort them with, showing your confidence that, look, this is going to work out okay. It's going to take some time, but it's going to work out okay. And nothing is going to change in our lives anytime soon. So just relax, take comfort in your friends who are truly your friends, and, be glad that you're discovering which friends are not really your friends. And just trust me that this will work out over time. So you got to work through that with your family. And then you got to work through your own plan with regards to, okay, I'm being targeted for whatever reason. I've been selected to be targeted. The SEC is going to come after me. It takes millions and millions and millions of dollars to fight the SEC. And one of the things, because you're fighting the federal government, okay, the unlimited checkbook. And, they throw an army of attorneys into whatever cases they're pursuing. And one of the things that's a little bit unfair about that, unlike in kind of, I think it's the United Kingdom and Britain, where they have a loser pay system, meaning that if you're found innocent of these kind of accusations, you can say, okay, now government, you got to pay my legal bills. In the US, it doesn't work that way. So if you're accused of something by the SEC and, you fight and fight and, it, let's say you win and it costs you, $20 million in legal fees. Well, it's like tough luck. You won, but you're still out of pocket $20 million, okay? So, great victory that is, that sounds more like punishment. So you got to think through all of that in terms of, what are my choices? What's my strategy going to be? And eventually, and in my particular case, I have a very deep spiritual faith that I had cultivated over the years. And one of my, I had various daily prayers, both morning and evening prayers. And part of one of my daily prayers was the phrase that all things work together for good to those who love God. Okay. And so once I had kind of settled my family into a reasonably calm situation pattern, I told my wife and family, I said, I need quiet time. I need some quiet time to pray and meditate. I need quiet time to think about what to do. And I just spent the next 2 weeks in my home office, praying and meditating. And my prayers always began with, all things work together for good to those who love God. Help me to understand how to see the good in what is happening. And I eventually, in that 2-week period, I came up with a strategy for how I was going to approach the situation. And to make a long story short, I hired what I call a junkyard dog attorney to pursue a claim of wrongful termination against Citi. And the terms of the settlement were that Citi was going to be the lead investor in a fund that I was going to start, venture capital fund, because this would enable me to be self-employed. Second was that Citi would be responsible for legal fees associated with anything connected to my employment tenure at Citi, but that Citi had no control over who the attorneys were or what the attorneys would do, that I was the only person who could control those decisions, but Citi paid the bills. So this put me in a situation where I could now fight the SEC, meaning that I was self-employed, because one of the things one of the decisions I had to make was that if I was under investigation by the SEC, I was essentially unemployable in the financial services industry. And what major financial institution is going to hire somebody that's been accused of civil fraud by the SEC? And so I was now, I had set myself up, so I had self-employment income, and I had unlimited legal resources of the sort required to fight the government. And that's what I did. And 3 years later, the SEC civil case was thrown out by the Federal District Court, U.S. District Court, Eastern District of New York, which handles Wall Street cases. And then it took until 2012, 8 years later, for the last of the class action suits. There's attorneys around the U.S. that whenever they see the SEC file litigation against a company or an individual that alleges civil fraud, then these, legal class action firms, they pile in and they file class action litigation, ostensibly on behalf of the shareholders or whoever was supposedly harmed.
Yeah, all the mailers go out.
Yeah, exactly. And they try to go after, they try to get clients to come in for the suits, and then they try to go after the assets of either the company or the individual. So it took until 2012 for the last of those class action suits to be thrown out and dismissed by the, U.S. District Court, Eastern District of New York. So my answer, it's a long answer to your question. I sum it up when I tell this story. I speak, I give book talks quite frequently. And so typically when I'm talking to students, I will tell them, usually tell them two anecdotes. And the first anecdote is the anecdote about the 100% effort. This is how you elevate yourself to not only knowing what you're capable of, but potentially elevate yourself to an arc of distinction. And the second anecdote that I give them is this story, because I tell them, everybody's life is probably going to have a time of trial. And for some people, it could be physical health or mental health, your significant other, or your children. It could be something that happens in your career. And then I tell them the story of being fired and thrown out the same day. And I tell them, when your time of trial comes, the question is, will you be prepared? How do you handle your time of trial? And I tell them that fortunately, I had deep spiritual strength, not because I had been planning for this time of trial, but, it was my nature, and that my spiritual strength positioned me to go through my time of trial, and that they should think about preparing themselves for their time of trial. Might not be the same trial I had to go through, but most people do face a time of trial at some point during their lives. And you need to know how to find the strength within yourself to manage it and overcome adversity. So that's my story. That's how I manage the adversity at Citigroup.
You mentioned that Citi in the agreement became an investor as you went on. I'm assuming that was the beginning of TWJ Capital?
That's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about what TWJ Capital does? And also then to kind of wrap it up, my last question is then, if you look back at what you were hoping to accomplish in the 60s and 70s and stretch it out over your career, did you accomplish or have you accomplished so far what you set out to do?
Okay. With regards to TWJ Capital, I would say the most recognizable anecdote would be, we invest in early stage startups or, startups that are beyond the seed stage, maybe have proof of concept and need growth capital. And so our most prominent investment was a company called Floor and Decor Outlets of America, which is a hard surface, flooring, stone, tile, wood, started in roughly the year 2000 by a very talented entrepreneur from Georgia, who had grown up in a family business that had actually been put out of business by Home Depot. But this fellow just had a real gift for these hard surface flooring and kitchen, patio type fixture products, bathroom surface products. He had a gift for both visualizing the product itself and the decorative aspect of how you design around the product. And through growing up in his family business, he had a wealth of connections around the world in terms of the various stone quarries and other sources where these products come from. And his idea to disrupt the kind of the designer tile business, let's call it that, was, typically if you or I were to redesign our home, we work with an interior designer. He shows us pictures of various things. We decide what we might want. We then go to a local tile shop. The tile shop places an order. The order goes to a regional distributor, and it goes through 6 or 7 pairs of hands, each of whom is adding a margin. And when the tile actually, whatever you ordered, the tile or the stone or whatever order, when it arrives several months later, it may or may not actually match what you were intending to get, because the picture that you saw and the sample that you saw at the tile store, they're actually going to be a little bit different than what comes out of the stone or the source at a different date. There are stone and tile, they're not of a uniform, tend not to be of a uniform quality. They shift slightly in terms of color and texture and so on. And so this entrepreneur's idea was to disrupt this business by building these 100,000 square foot and later scaled down to like 60,000 square foot big box stores. And he was going to order this product in kind of ocean shipping container lots, size lots, huge quantities into this warehouse type store. And he was going to display it, build these beautiful displays of, sample of this is what your bathroom wall might look like, or this is your kitchen floor, or this is your patio, and so on. And he would have the product right there that if you're a designer or you're a builder and you agreed on what you wanted, you could just buy it that day because they had it in stock in these giant stores. And that because of the quantities in which he was purchasing the product and eliminating all the middlemen, that he could sell this stuff at roughly 65% of what it would typically cost and still achieve 40% gross margins. So that was the business model. So he had gotten some investors to back him, and they had built this out to like 9 stores over a 5-year period. And they made a couple of mistakes. So, for example, when you're pursuing that kind of business model, one of the problems is that all of your expenses come up front. So what do I mean by that? For every store you open, you've got to sign the lease for the warehouse property. You've got to hire all the staff. You've got to train the staff. You got to go buy all of the product to put into the store. So all these expenses are up front. And your revenue doesn't start till day one when you open the store. And you have to understand, well, what's going to be the rate? What's the model? What's the pace at which my revenue will build? How long is it going to take me to go from zero in an unknown store that just opened up to getting that revenue run rate up to where it actually covers the cost of this operation? So they had made a couple of mistakes, as they built out this model. And along the line, about maybe it was the 4th or 5th store, they had managed to get a bank loan, because that's how you try to, typically in those kind of businesses, that's how you try to kind of manage the cost of your inventory, by having relatively inexpensive debt financing a large part of the inventory. But they had made a couple of mistakes in terms of the model, the analytics in the model of how that revenue curve would build, and they had defaulted. They were in default on the bank debt. And the investors who had backed him were people that I knew from my prior life. And, they knew I had just started a fund. And they called me and asked if I would help. And I said, well, I don't know. I'm willing to look, and I can promise you, I won't promise you that I'll help, but I'll promise you that I will make a quick decision. I will let you know whether, in a reasonable period of time, before the bank debt, before the bank actually goes to court, I will let you know. And so I met with the people that had backed him. They couldn't invest anymore because they had reached the limit on how much they could put into, in terms of their agreement with their investors. They had reached the limit in terms of how much they could put into any one investment, because of the diversification requirements in their fund. And so I met with the investment team, and I thought the model was pretty interesting, and I could see where they had made the mistakes, what the problem was. And then I met with the entrepreneur who had started the business, and he was extremely impressive. And then I went around and visited all of their stores, and I was frankly pretty impressed with the power of the model, and how well they displayed the product and how competitive it looked. And so I decided I would help them, and I made them an offer, which you'll find this interesting, because people expect, when they're in a situation like that, they expect anybody who comes in to make a predatory offer, kind of really rip their guts out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I made them an offer which surprised them. I said, I'm impressed with what you've built here, and here's what I'll do. I said, I will invest the $2 million that you need in order to cure this bank default. Okay, I'll give you that immediately. And I said, I will invest the $2 million on the same exact economic terms as your current investment. So people are surprised at that. Same economic terms, boy. And I said, but there's a but. And the but is, I'm not going to invest in the same class of securities that you have. So, for example, if you're holding, Series A preferred stock, I'm going to invest through Series B preferred stock. And Series B preferred stock will have the same exact economic terms as your Series A. But Series B is going to have certain economic protections. And those protections are going to be that if we miss budgets, if we default on any bank debt, if we want to borrow more money, or if we need to raise new capital, the only way that can be done is with a majority vote of the Series B preferred stock. So that in effect meant I've got negative control of the company. What do I mean by negative control? If things go well, we're all in this together and we're pari passu, equal economic terms. But if things don't go well, and we run into problems, the only way you can get out of your problems is you got to go through me. Okay? So the upside we all share. If we're in trouble and looking at the downside, I'm in control. Well, to make a long story short, they accepted that offer because it was generous relative to what they thought they would get. 3 years later, after being satisfied, that the model was actually getting traction, I invested another $5 million. We built that out. It was like 9 stores when I went in. Well, it was 5 when I went in. The first phase, we took it out to 9, then we ultimately took it to 25, a $250 million revenue run rate, and we sold it to Ares Capital Management for $450 million. And then Ares, which is one of the big West Coast funds, they built it out to like 60 stores, and it took it public like 2 years ago. It's on the New York Stock Exchange, FND. It's one of the hottest stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. Look it up. Its symbol is FND. And so that's the kind of investing that I do. Troubled situations like that. But basically, I'm betting on the talent, and that's all that. Whatever they call all venture, it's at the end of the day, it's just a bet on talent. As far as I'm concerned, all business is a bet on talent. It's all about the talent.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back over your career, would you say you accomplished what you set out to do?
More so because, my initial goal was to just be part of that first wave of African Americans trying to climb the corporate ladder in America. I mean, the first black vice president in an American corporation didn't happen till like 1963 or 1964, as like at Pepsi. And the Ku Klux Klan started boycotting Pepsi products because there was a black vice president. So the 70s was the first wave of African Americans trying to climb the corporate ladder in America. And, my ambition was to just be one of those warriors trying to climb that mountain. And ended up with, actually success that I could not even have imagined, because I didn't know enough about corporate America to really fully understand what ambitions I should have. I just knew that's where there would be a tough fight, because that's where the wealth was. So I walk away very, very satisfied. I've been blessed, in beyond any reasonable expectations that I could have had. I've had a good life and a good career, and even that story I told you about Citi, that one of the things I say in my book, that phrase, all things work together for good to those who love God. When at the end of that ordeal, I say in the book, it turns out I had been blessed in 3 ways. That through this ordeal, I had been blessed in 3 ways. The first was that I sold all of my Citigroup stock shortly after being fired, early 2005, because I said, this guy, Chuck Prince, is not going to be successful as CEO. Well, I got out at $48 a share. 3 years later, Citi was busted, being rescued by the federal government because they had held proprietary mortgage positions, okay? They had to be taken over by the federal government, and the stock was down to $3 a share. And, that's when Prince resigned. He had blown up the company. It was down to $3 a share. And so I was blessed financially by having gotten out at 48 I was blessed spiritually in that, I had grown much closer to my wife and my children. Ordeals like that can either blow up a relationship, blow up a family, or they can bring you much closer together because of that shared suffering, the pain of what you're going through and the feeling that the whole world is turned against us. And fortunately, we came out of it. My family came out of it on the side of it. It brought us closer together. So that was a great blessing. And then third, I felt like I had been blessed physically, because it wasn't until I stopped, the routine of working at a place like Citi and started working for myself in my investment business, which to me, even though I was working all day, frankly, it felt like I was working part-time, okay? It felt like it was just, because my days, I had a normal day. I'd get to the office at 8, I'd leave at 6. I could watch the late show in the evening. It's not the stress of managing thousands of people and traveling all over the world and all of that stuff going on all the time. And so even though I, was able to stay in the game and work full time, I felt like I was working the equivalent to part time. So, and it was only when I slowed down that I appreciated, wow, I was really working over the top. Yeah. Glad I slowed down before something happened to me,
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it isn't until you rest and take it easy a little bit that you realize how intense your work schedule was and actually how tired you were because you never stopped being tired, It just becomes the way you feel all the time. You're tired because you're working all the time. So that's the kind of three blessings. And so I feel, and then, I don't count this as one of the blessings in what I write about in the book, but I actually feel that all of that led to my having the perspective and the desire to write a book, to tell the story. And I probably never would have turned to that ambitious effort of, I'm going to write a book and tell this story. Because it's a lot of, it takes a lot of energy to conceive of a book, and actually it took me 5 years to write it. And so all of that's worked out, just in ways that I'm truly thankful for, and could not have imagined, could not have imagined when I was just starting out.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time. That was Thomas W. Jones, founder and senior partner of venture capital investment firm TWJ Capital, and author of the new book, From Willard Straight to Wall Street, a memoir. You can check out all of his stuff at TWJcapital.com. Thomas, are there any other websites or anything else you want to promote?
I'd really like people to take a look at my blog and go to www.tomjones69, that's the year I graduated from Cornell.com, www.tomjones69.com. And one of the things you'll see on the home screen there is a blog. I write a regular blog, really focused on, racial issues in the U.S. And you may, you may find some good food for thought there. So take a look at that.
Everybody go check that out. Also check out his book, like I said, From Willard Straight to Wall Street, a memoir. To everybody else, thank you so much for joining us today here on the Work From Home Show. Check us out. You can see all of our old episodes at workfromhomeshow.com. That's workfromhomeshow.com. Also get on our mailing list there. We'll send you a freebie for doing so. Leave us a review on your podcast platform. Whatever it is, take a screenshot of the review. Email it to us at hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And we'll send you another freebie. I believe at the moment it's one of Naresh's books. So make sure you do that. Like I said, check us out, workfromhomeshow.com. Email us with anything, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And until next week, keep on working from home.